Kei Ngahiwi Tomoana o te motu, no mai haere mai. So much to unpack from last week's tangihanga to honour Dr. Moana Jackson, his brilliant legacy, his passionate commitment to furthering all things Māori, and, progressive to the very end, his desire that Wahine Māori speak at his tangi. Kirsty Babington sits down with Ngahiwi Tomoana, who was charged with fulfilling Moana's wishes.
Tēnā koe, thank you for your time. Tuatahi, kai te pēhea koe.
Kei te ora, kei te noho whakatāi nei, muri mai ngā rā e turikone. Engari, kei te hari koa hau, ki ngā mea puta mai tērā tangihanga o Moana.
More than 10,000 people converged on Matahiwi Marae in Hawke's Bay last weekend to farewell Moana Jackson. It was a logistical triumph for the hapu, but it also reignited a wānanga about kawa and tikanga on our marae.
Take me back to that phone call when Papa Moana had passed and realising that you needed to enact and facilitate Moana's requests.
Well, he had summoned me and he gave me a whole printed essay on what he wanted at his tangi. No Christian karakia. Women speak on the Paepae and Taranaki will have the final karakia. So when Mediana rang up the night before to say that he probably wouldn't last the night, she rang up 5 o'clock in the morning and said he's gone. And so I just clicked into action, rang the marae here and said, Moana's gone, can we have a meeting? So we had a talk at the marae and the marae was very good. Mostly Wahine on the committee. And they said, you must manage the Wahine speaking. We're not giving this over easy. But it's Moana himself that requested it. Not you, not anyone else. So we'll whakakiko on the kōrero, on the ohaki. And so we decided to just try and manage it best we can, knowing that there's going to be fraught with, you know, how Māori are. It's going to be fraught with colour, with texture, with diverse patterns, with disruptions. We also knew that our own people would be the ones who'd jump up and do the haka over women speaking and all that.
So when you had that meeting and you said mostly women were there, what were some of the considerations? What did you have to think through?
They said, which we normally do, the women can only speak under the maho. They must be of status. We don't want everybody getting up because men have to go through a drafting gate too to get to the Paepae. They have to have been supported by their hapu and their iwi or their ropu to speak on their behalf. Could you find that out? Yes, I find that out. Nah, I couldn't. You know, those are the yes, nah. Because I didn't know who was getting up and it was... So I just had to roll with it and just try and minimise any fallout for the women themselves, for the speakers themselves, for manuhiri that may have felt disgruntled by it all, and by the hau kainga, who some of the older ones insisted that women would not speak. And that we were here for sending Moana off, not for our own egos.
That was interesting that you said under the maho, because that's different to the pai, ne?
It's totally different. And so we said no, they should speak in the same manner as the pai. So we arranged that to happen. And we said, look, this is a one-off, we'll talk about it later. Let's process it later.
You are dealing with a whole new dynamic for some.
But we have institutional memory of our women speaking on the marae in Kahungane, especially around here. Just 10 years ago, Hene Paepae would speak on every marae in Wairarapa, frail old lady, who you could hear a pin drop whenever she spoke, and she didn't have a loud voice. Our famous woman speaking here was Hene Katorangi. She would speak all around the country on behalf of Kahungane, and people would abandon their paepaes whenever she turned up.
One of the reasons given that women shouldn't speak on the pai or on the marae is because it's the realm of tūmatauenga.
We say he taurākau ka tai ki te karo, he tauararo, haere tōtike ki te manawa. So a wooden spear can be parried, but a verbal spear splits the heart. And so the heart destroys the whare tangata of a woman, her ability to conceive, her ability over generations to conceive. He makutu pē, he whaiwhaia pē, he mate Māori. So that's how they were sort of protecting our whare tangata from mate Māori.
Do we still live in those times that makutu could be thrown out across the play?
Yes, I've seen that. So, you know, again, 50 years on the pie, I've seen makutu handed out.
What was it like for you personally to sit next to a wahine Māori on the pai?
Normal. I just had that, you know, it's a pre-planning, there's preconceptions, and this would have been like. So to me it was normal. I was worried about everybody else, I wasn't worried about me. And if you had to deflect anything, well, I'm there, and we're here. But I just thought it was normal.
The other request was to have no Christianity or no presence of the church here. Now in arohe such as Kahungunu, there's a strong religious element. How do people cope with that?
We would say there's a difference between the church and between Christianity itself. But Moana exclusively asked that there be no Christianity. So we adhere to that. Some people couldn't help themselves and had to bring in ihu karaiti, me te ripika, and that was all right, but the family were offended by it, which shows that there's not that balance or tolerance of those things. We have to tolerate who people are and where they are at any particular time. And if we can't do that, we're not being the Manaaki people we should be. Whano, hara mai te toki, haumia, huie, taiki.
Moana was a change maker. He challenged the status quo, or he brought light to issues that needed to be addressed. Through his tangihanga, have we seen another shift?
The fact that we did have rangatahi and wahine speaking into reo on the marae is a consequence of Moana's, Sid's, Hana's, all those fellas, all those heroes, all our heroes and heroines of that time. We've still got Mediana and Annette Sykes beating the drum, and we should never have it stop. We should never allow it to stop. So we need to keep transforming every day, every week, every month, and not be slaves to Constitution that we've put ourselves under. So hapu tikanga and hapu kawa, they will transform, because Moana put us where we want to be, in our heads. And he said, tino rangatira's in your head. You got it. Just take it 2 clicks to the right and you're there. You know, it's not magic.
The discussions will continue, not just at Matahiwi either. We send all our love to the whānau pani, still dealing with the grief of Moana suddenly not being in their midst. Coming up after the break, Cameron Bennett with David Stone. Welcome back. Last Wednesday, the top brass at Defence gathered at Waiouru along with the last surviving member of the Maori Battalion to announce that the unclaimed medals of more than 500 battalion warriors who fought in World War II are now available to their descendants.
It was a moment when we recognised great mana, the mana that they brought to themselves, the mana that they brought to their battalion, to our army, and of course to our nation.
All I can say is it's about time.
Kia ora to that, koro. And it was all down to lawyer David Stone and his 3-year campaign to put history right. David tells Cameron Bennett that for him it was deeply personal.
From Greece to North Africa and Italy, the heroic exploits of the 28th Māori Battalion still echo through history. And every April, we remember those who returned and those who never did.
Well, we got my two tipuna here.
David Stone's great uncle was one who never made it home.
This one here, this is Turi Dooley Swan.
Handsome young fellow, and what was his age?
It's about, well, it says that he was 19. I don't believe that.
What do you believe?
16.
Wow.
Yes, that's what it was according to my grandfather.
Great uncle Private Dooley Tui Swan, C Company. There's the portrait, the memory, but not much else.
Dad and I were literally at home, sitting down at the dinner table having a feed of pork bones, and we just said to each other, how come our uncle hasn't got his medals?
So David started researching, first C Company and then the others. Sifting through dozens on dozens of service records, he discovered that overall, some 18% of Māori Battalion servicemen never received the medals they were entitled to.
So I then wrote to the Waitangi Tribunal and said to the Chief Judge, this is what I've done. I've done my dash, I've looked at my 100-odd, I've done my duty. Can you please ask the Crown if they can look at all 3,600? And he did that, and the Crown come back saying, yeah, nah. You know, big legacy, lots of money, but yeah, nah, it's not the right time. And I thought, what? You know, and I just thought, that's not cool. And so I said, oh, well, with or without you, we're going to do it. And so we just carried on, and we went through every single village throughout all of C Company and the East Coast, and we did it. And I said to them, oh, yeah, your dad is entitled to 3, 5, 7, 9 medals, and every single person that sat in the chair broke down.
The NZDF Medals Department swung in behind, and last April in Gisborne, with Sir Bom Gillies, the last battalion man standing there to witness it, unclaimed medals of 134 C Company men were handed out to descendants, and emotions ran high.
6-3-1-2-0-9, George Faulkner is awarded the New Zealand Defence Service Medal with clasp regular. Receiving today is his wife, Mere Faulkner.
Explain to whānau what the process is to retrospectively apply for a medal.
There is a form. It's on the Te Mata Law website as well as the New Zealand Defence website, and they simply have to fill it out. But the tricky bit is that you need to prove a link between yourself, the applicant, and the soldier. But there are some problems. For example, the name on the birth certificate may not match up to the name that he recruited under because he was underage, so he changed his name, and we encountered that. Or they may have anglicised their name, where Praone became Brown or Paula became Paul. Well, there was one soldier that changed his name 3 different times.
When they returned home, soldiers were expected to apply for their own medals. There are good reasons why so many didn't.
One of them was wanting to be humble about things, because you need to keep in mind, and I'm grateful for Noel and Raihania, who went away with my uncle. They thought about those soldiers that didn't come back. And the nanny said, don't come around here thinking you're some sort of hero. The heroes are the ones that didn't come back. So they didn't wear their medals to be what's called whakahihi, or showing off, because it reminded those nannies and them of the ones that didn't bring back.
Was there also a sense that real mana wasn't being respected when you got your medals through the mail?
That's a big part of it. And they said to me, there's no mana in receiving a medal in the mail. You've got to do it according to our tikanga, which is face to face. You know, we've gone away and fought for you. The least you can do is shake my hand when you give it to me. So, you know, these men held on to that principle.
David estimates around 2,000 medals are waiting to be collected, taonga from the legendary 28th Battalion that suffered casualties 50% higher than other Kiwi outfits. Of the 3,600 who volunteered, 549 never returned.
When you look at how our men and our women were treated as soon as they got off that boat.
And not just that, the battalion served with remarkable distinction, on and above all other infantry battalions. A huge casualty rate.
Yep, they certainly paid the price of what's been called the price of citizenship. And you look at those statistics for the East Coast and everywhere else, it was, they certainly did more than their part.
David Stone is a lawyer specialising in treaty and land issues. His campaign to do the right thing by tipuna long past has been profoundly affecting.
What I'm hoping to give to the recipients of these medals is the one thing that my grandfather didn't have, which was the chance to say goodbye.
It still cuts deep, all these years and generations later, for David, for his father, and so many others.
It's quite funny, Cam, when we had a hearing for the Waitangi Tribunal, we had my grandfather's brief, and we had my dad's, and I gave my dad's to him, and we were in a car park in Napier. And I said, oh, here's your brief, have a read. And I went away, did some shopping, I come back, and he was crying. I said, what the hell? And I was like blown away by that, because Dad was another one that's never shown any emotion. I said, why is he crying for a man he never knew? And I've thought about that for a long time, but I still don't quite, can't say I don't know the answer, but just goes to show that there's a lot of emotion there.
What amazing mahi, David, on behalf of so many whānau. Ngā mihi kia koe e hoa. After the break, we meet a rock star of the digital world. Welcome back. When you think about it, so much of our everyday lives depends on number crunching, predicting the weather, financial markets, figuring out how a virus might spread around the community, you name it. Turns out, the super brain behind one of the world's leading number crunching programs is Māori, and a proud Westie at that. Shamina Smith with this story.
Meet Ross Ihaka. Just like the t-shirt says, millions around the world use the software, billions depend on it.
From early age, I've always been a philosophical anarchist. I don't like rules and being told what to do.
It's pretty technical stuff, but the gist of it is, in the early 1990s, Ross and a colleague developed a cutting-edge computer programming language. Today, millions of analysts, data scientists and big-name companies absolutely depend on it. The software is called R, named after the first initial Ross shares with R's co-founder, Robert Gentleman.
When we first started out, people hated us for choosing the name R, right? Because you go and do a Google search on R, and you can imagine how many results you'd get.
Now, you might be wondering what R actually is. Ross explains it in a nutshell.
It's a tool that people who do statistics use to get their answers.
The R programming language is literally a taonga, a gift that Ross and his colleague wanted to make free to the world.
The free software idea is that software should be free, not just software, but information in general should be free.
Because R is free to all, Ross can't control who uses it, but he's okay with that.
What do you think about sort of the big social media tech companies and their influence?
I don't think they're a force for good, and I stay away from them.
How do you feel about, the fact that your software is in use at all of these companies?
It's a tool. I'm sure they use pencils there too, and pens and paper. Any tool can be used for good or bad purposes. It's their responsibility what they do with it.
These days, R has taken on a life of its own.
I mean, I don't really even follow all the things that people are doing with it now, but you'll find that there are people who have written programs to solve Sudoku, and that's one measure of success for a programming language. If it gets used for things you didn't in your wildest dreams expect, then it's been a success.
You've set it free, if you like, or perhaps you did that a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a child, you know, you bring it up and you send it out into the world and you hope it does well, but then it's on its own.
When you look back at the early days of Ross's career, it's not surprising he built something revolutionary. For example, while he was doing his PhD at the University of California, Berkeley in the 1980s, he was rubbing shoulders with people who were doing pioneering computer science work.
When I arrived in Berkeley, I got a taxi from the airport, and I asked the taxi driver what sort of things went on in Berkeley, and he said, anything you like. And he was right. But the building of sort of practical computer networks and things was actually taking place on the floor of the building that I was actually working on. And there were people on my floor who went on to found things like Sun Microsystems, which was a big computing company. The guy who used to come around and fix our email program actually ended up being the head of Google.
Wow. So kind of maybe looking back, it must feel a little bit surreal kind of being there at that time. Perhaps.
Yeah, well, it felt fairly surreal at the time as well because, you know, it was clear that what was going on was very important work at the time.
Ross's later career is also marked by numerous impressive accolades, such as a professorship in statistics and receiving one of New Zealand's top science awards. But he puts his success down to his academic forebears, which he proudly wears on his sleeves.
This one here is Euler's equation, which is e to the I pi plus 1 is equal to 0. It's named after Leonard Euler, who I can trace back through my academic whakapapa. This one here is actually the motto from the University of California, Fiat Lux. So I plan to get a few more of these as my, display my academic whakapapa.
When it comes to Ross's Māori whakapapa, things get a bit more complicated because of the era he grew up in.
My father was one of a generation who weren't allowed to speak Maori, and in fact his grandfather would beat him if he ever caught him speaking Maori. So we lost a certain amount at that point. It's a funny position to be in. I would say I'm Maori, I'm Pākehā, I'm both, and I'm neither.
It's from this position that Ross watched the recent Mātauranga Māori science controversy with interest.
I have a certain amount of sympathy for the people who put pen to paper about that, because a lot of teaching has diluted the mathematical sciences and hard sciences. So while I think it's good to introduce traditional knowledge, if the price of that is losing some of the scientific capability that we have already, I would feel troubled by that.
Ross believes Mātauranga stands on its own as a body of knowledge, so questions around whether or not it's science are a distraction.
I don't think you can view knowledge as competitive. Within a particular discipline you may have competing theories, but the disciplines themselves shouldn't be regarded as competitive. So to talk about equal status or non-equal status, I think is a red herring. The important thing is that people avail themselves of the knowledge, make use of it.
These days, though, Ross likes to stay above the fray. He's recently retired and does a bit of consultancy work on the side. And his plans for the future?
I'm planning to move to the far north and garden and fish and get kai moana and keep a low profile, I guess.
Many computers around, or?
I might have a computer, but the idea would be to get offline as much as possible and get back to the real world.
That was Shamina Smith with Ross Ihaka. There you go. He's a dark horse, isn't he? Now, just before we go, I want to take a minute, take two. Tangihanga is the ultimate Māori cultural expression, the most resilient of all our traditions, a safe space where Māori can be unapologetically and beautifully Māori. That hit home to me recently after being in Tangihanga for a whole week. What incredible social gatherings these are. They bring people together from all walks of life, whether at the Marae or in someone's backyard. Tangihanga is all about whanaungatanga and aroha in action. Relationships and ideas are celebrated, challenged, nurtured. Tangihanga are full of ritual, emotion is encouraged, it's theatre, native styles, a showcase of oratory, song, storytelling, where talk turns to politics, sports, business and gossip, and the humour. So many jokes, usually at the expense of the deceased. Some tangi are talked about years after. I remember the spectacular haka face-off at the tangi of our Ngāti Tūwhare Toa Ariki Hepi Te Hiuhiu. And that time a calf trotted onto the marae behind an unsuspecting Te Moera Morrison as he paid tribute to wee Cookie Ka. Tangihanga helps adults prepare children to accept that death is part of life and that whakapapa is, as Moana Jackson described, a series of never-ending beginnings. Tikanga may be tweaked and practices may continue to evolve, but tangihanga, our dying tradition, is very much alive. Pō Mariē.